good morning, everybody. We're a couple minutes after 9:30 here, as per usual, before Still's time. As you guys might remember, Jason is out of town. He's actually preaching up in Kentucky. So as a form of punishment, we decided that I would teach the class here to help keep you guys in line. But this kind of thing really makes you recognize the blessing that you have having such a gifted orator here for Forest Hills. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be picking up in lesson 17 in Nathan's book, kind of picking up and concluding the book of Habakkuk. So if you want to turn in your Bible, we're going to be pretty much out of Habakkuk 3. And the title of this lesson is In Wrath, Remember Mercy. So what we'll do is recap a little bit and go through the lesson, and let's see what we can gain from this. We'll go ahead and start with a prayer before we begin. Pray with me. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to come together to read of your word, to see the words of your prophets and see how they interacted with you, to help us to better learn how our prayer life should be. Help us to establish the types of relationships that they had with you, be able to so freely speak with you as if standing there in front of you. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to study from your word to help us learn and grow from this. We're mostly thankful today, Father, for your Son who came and bore our sins on the cross, that we might be able to have this mercy from your wrath that will come in the time of judgment. We ask you to be with us as we go through this lesson, and it is in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right, so coming into the book of Habakkuk here, into chapter 3, we've made our way through the first couple of chapters. Habakkuk has always been a pretty interesting book where we don't have any interactions between the prophet and the people. We don't have people or interactions from any other parties really in this aside from just Habakkuk talking to God. Starting in that first chapter, he jumps straight into it. So kind of recapping and going into the context of what we have for our lesson today is in the first chapter, we start off with Habakkuk's lament. He's crying violence. He's asking why. There's a lot of misdeeds being done. There's so much wrong going on in the land. He's asking God, how can you let this happen? And then he gets a response from God. And it's definitely not a response that he wants. God responds to him, letting him know that he's going to be raising up the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, who are going to be coming through, marching through the land. And, I don't know if I were in Habakkuk's shoes, if I would have any other career, I would probably react a lot worse. Just a terrifying response. You imagine finding out that not only is all this injustice happening in the land, the one place that you're going to ask for help, the one place that you're going to your Creator to ask him why he hasn't stepped in, only to find out that this is going to be happening. But this is actually going to be his stepping in. He gives some clarification now to Habakkuk. Habakkuk now knows what's going to be happening. And then he pronounces 5 woes over Babylon. And then we come into yet another section. If you're in Habakkuk, if you're in chapter 1, we have a second prayer after God tells Habakkuk everything that's going to be happening here. And then this is almost something that I have a lot of trouble coming to grips with, is the method of which Habakkuk then starts to communicate with God. It's almost like he's asking these series of rhetorical questions. He's asking him, are you not from eternity, my Lord, my Holy One? You will not die. Lord, you anointed them to execute judgment, my rock. You destined them to punish us. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. So why do you tolerate those who are treacherous? Why are you silent while one who is wicked swallows up one who is more righteous than himself? You have made mankind like the fish of the sea, like marine creatures that have no ruler. The Chaldeans pull them all up with a hook, catch them with their dragnet, gather them in their fishing net. This is why they are glad and rejoice. That is why they sacrifice to their dragnet and burn incense to their fishing net. For these things their portion is rich, their food plentiful. Will they therefore empty the net and continually slaughter nations without mercy? I mean, he is really not holding back in his communications with God. He can't understand why, what's going on. And then you get into that that next beginning section in Habakkuk 2, where Habakkuk says he's going to stand guard his post, he's going to station on the look tower, watch out, see what he will say to me, and what should I reply about my complaint. Or depending on what version you have, he's like waiting for his reprimand to come. The New American Standard has reprimand in there instead of complaint. But instead of the response that we think that we might see from God, or almost the response that Habakkuk's complaint, or that Habakkuk is expecting with his complaint, is he gets an explanation. God instead gives him more information and clarifies some things to him. He lets him know that Babylon's not going to be escaping judgment, but all this is happening because this is what he is willing. Then you have that series of 5 woes where Babylon is going to be suffering for their extortion and theft, the unjust behaviors of illegal gain, their violence, drunkenness, shameful behavior, their idolatry. God ends this statement at the end of chapter 2 in verse 20. It says, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let the whole earth be silent in his presence." Be silent in his presence. One of the footnotes that I have in one of the study Bibles I was going through in preparation for this is when it says, "Let the world be silent." The translation was literally "hush." It's basically telling the world to be quiet. For the Lord is in his holy temple. So coming out of this is where we are now leading into this third and final prayer coming from Habakkuk. We now have a different kind of tone coming out of everything. Everything leading up to this point has been Habakkuk's complaints, his laments, his sadness, his terror that he's experienced from what God's told him. God telling him that this judgment's coming, and telling him that he needs to wait to see what's going to come from this. So now, coming into chapter 3, we have a different format also to what the prayer is. So here, we have a prayer that is written as a psalm. If you look in chapter 3, verse 1, where it says a prayer of the prophet Habakkuk according to Shigionoth, that's only used one other time, that particular term. This is a plurality of that term, but the only other time that term is used is in Psalms. So this kind of tells us that this is a prayer that's going to be something that is used later in time by, of course, a lot of the nation of Israel. So this is the same reason we give prayer, or the reason the Psalms are written in song format. They didn't have necessarily written word for them to be able to remember all these things, so a lot of this was passed down in song. So let's read through chapter 3 here and kind of get us into the lesson that we're going to be here with this morning. So starting in verse 2, it says, "Lord, I have heard the report about you. Lord, I stand in awe of your deeds. Revive your work in these years. Make it known in these years. In your wrath, remember mercy. God comes from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His brilliance is like light, rays of flashing from his hands. This is where his power is hidden. Plague goes down before him, and pestilence follows in his steps. He stands and shakes the earth. He looks and startles the nations. The age-old mountains break apart. The ancient hills sink down. His pathways are ancient. I see the tents of Cushan in distress, and the tent curtains of the land of Midian tremble. Are you angry at the rivers, Lord, and your wrath against the rivers, or is your fury against the sea? When you ride on your horses, your victorious chariot. You took the sheath from your bow. The arrows are ready to be used with an oath. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains see you and shudder. A downpour of water sweeps by. The deep roars with its voice and lifts its waves high. Sun and moon stand still in their lofty residence. At the flash of your flying arrows, at the brightness of your shining spear, you march across the earth with indignation. You trample down the nations in wrath. You come out to save your people, to save your anointed. You crush the leader of the house of the wicked and strip from him from foot to neck. You pierce his head with his own spears. His warriors storm out to scatter us, gloating as if to secretly devour the weak. You tread the sea with your horses, stirring up the vast water. I heard, and I trembled within. My lips quivered at the sound. Rottenness entered my bones. I trembled where I stood. Now I must quietly wait for the days of distress to come against the people invading us. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there is no fruit on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the field produces no food, though the flock disappear from the pen, and there are no herds in the stalls, yet I will celebrate in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord, my Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer, and enables me to walk on mountain heights. And then we have another note closing out for the psalm indicator for the choir director on stringed instruments at the end of that. Sir.
Before you consider that prayer, consider that in chapter 2, Habakkuk was told by God, the just shall live by faith. In the interim in the chapter, God tells some of the things and ways by which he works, and then he closes, the Lord is in his holy temple, which is parallel in thought to the just shall live by faith. We don't have a lot of choice about the time we live in and what happens. And Nina and I have given a class to the college age on what happens when your life doesn't work out the way you planned it, which nothing did. And so here, this prayer is Habakkuk's response to God. His life is not, will not, cannot be what he has thought and hoped and planned. And this is his response, and it's just awesome.
Oh yeah, that's a fantastic response. Thank you so much for that comment too. I mean, that's a bit of what we talked about in the last two classes over the back, right? Is that God's will we'll seek out. It seems like almost never is it at what we would think it would be. I always like the saying of, we make plans and God laughs, right? Is we have such a minuscule understanding of the way that things operate compared to what he knows. To be able to see everything from start to finish, to be able to understand how things are going to work out. I mean, we are stuck in that really finite little area of time that we have. We might be going through the most terrible things in our lives at any given moment, whether from disease, financial things, trouble within our families, actual violence, depending on where you are in the world, or even having places like here. We are stuck in the mire of what we're looking at that moment, but we don't really get to see how that's going to work out towards the end. For all we know, everything that we're going through and suffering for is going to work out to his glory in the end, because there might be somebody who later in your life, after having gone through these things, needs somebody who's gone through what you've gone through. And all of this works out for God's plan. Or just picture being there in and amongst the people when Christ is on the cross. I mean, they thought that they lost. Here they thought they had the Messiah in their hands. He was going to come, and here he is dying on the cross. They didn't understand really what God's plan was for all of that. It's the same that we see here with Habakkuk. He doesn't have the understanding of what is really going to be happening here. And then we have him then coming back and leaning on his faith and understanding that what God's doing is what is planned. So coming into the next section here, if you've got a copy of the handout, so we see three different parts of Habakkuk's prayer here in chapter 3. So in the first part, we have where Habakkuk's acceptance really, of what it is that God had told him. He didn't hear necessarily what he wanted to hear, but he is coming to understand that what is going to happen is going to happen here. He said, Lord, I heard the report about you, and I stand in awe of your deeds. But then he's revive your work in these years, make it known in these years. He's calling for it to come on. And then still yet, he's asking, in your wrath, remember mercy. Nathan really makes a good call out in this section where he's talking about remembering. We'll see time and time again where different prophets, different people will ask God to remember. It's not in a sense of, hey, in case you forgot. It's got a covenant connotation. So this is speech that is pointing back to the covenant relationship that they have with God. So he's asking him still yet for mercy in this time. I don't think that there's anything, or I know that there's not anything wrong with that. There's no reason for us to be in these times of trials and still not ask him for his mercy, for things to change. But he knows that his request to have the Babylonians stop isn't going to happen. That it's going to come to play, but now he is starting to remember, or rather than remember, he's accepting what has been said, and that he is going to ask for mercy at this time. So in the second part, we have the vision of the warrior God coming in judgment and in victory. So in the warrior God, Habakkuk uses a lot of Exodus and Old Testament, or what we call Old Testament, a lot of Exodus imagery in regards to what he is describing here. So when he's talking here regarding the Exodus, he's making references to the wilderness journey, plague and pestilence. We know that the different plagues and everything that were done at their time when they were in Egypt. In the context, he makes the imagery of with the rivers, with the seas, horse and chariot related also to the Exodus and the conquest. God has gone to war before. We've seen it multiple times in the accounts before this, and he is always victorious. His victory is not going to be denied. And then the next part we see is that nature itself is impacted when God comes to judgment. Now, he's not speaking of literal things that are going to be happening here, but it's just going in saying, giving the information of just how grand and glorious that God is. Rays of light from his hands. In standing, he causes the earth to shudder. Mountains are shattered. All figurative language that is speaking towards his power, which can't be defeated. Just a lot of wonderful imagery that Habakkuk has throughout this prayer. But now, again, this is more towards his acceptance. This is his understanding of this is what's coming to be. He's no longer in this pleading and lamenting kind of mode that he was in the first two chapters. He's come to accept what's going to be happening, and in song, really, here. He's singing about what's going to come and happen with this coming judgment. And then the next part, this is where Brother Ward was even just touching on, is Habakkuk's declaration. So, leading up to this, we have a lot of trial and trouble that Habakkuk is asking questions on. But then in verse 16, he kind of talks even more detail as the level of fear and terror that he felt with this. So in verse 16, he says, I heard, and I trembled within. My lips quivered at the sound. Rottenness entered my bones. I trembled where I stood. Now I must quietly wait for the day of distress to come against the people invading us. I mean, he felt this deep within himself. I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever been in a situation where things are going so wrong that you can feel it in your core. He had a front row seat to see what's coming to happen by way of vision. And it hit him so deep inside that, he was shaking within. His his lips were quivering. Say that he feels rottenness in his bones. It almost makes me feel like he's ready to collapse from the level of fear and terror that he's experiencing. But then he comes to the realization and finishes up that statement where he knows that he has to wait quietly for what's coming. There's no stopping what's coming. And he's come almost to peace, it feels like, within that. And also in this faith, when you read in verse 17 and 18, it says, though the fig tree does not bud, there's no fruit on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the field produces no food, though the flocks disappear from the pen, and there is no herds in the stalls. Yet I will celebrate in the Lord, I will rejoice in my salvation. So he's come to grips so much so that even if things go completely against the direction that he wants it to go, if things are as bad as they can absolutely get, that it's not all lost. He'll celebrate the Lord, and he will rejoice in the God of his salvation. He understands here that all glory belongs to the Lord here, and that in his inner attitude now, we see a shift. We see him leaning now on his faith, coming to the understanding that what has to happen is going to be what happens, and that's not going to change the way that he's looking at God. He's going to celebrate the Lord, even though this is coming down on him, and he's going to rejoice because God is still his salvation. There's no change to that. So bringing us now into the connections component in the lesson we have. So when you look at this, it's I had to kind of reread a few times. The first point that he makes is when prayer based on God's character fails. It's not any point of what God does is what fails. So Habakkuk at no time is making any kind of request outside of what he knows God's nature to be. He's not asking God to do anything different than what he would do normally. When we think of making a prayer in regards to what the nature of God is, there's really not a better way to align your prayer with how he would see things to be. We know that he's a God of forgiveness. We know that he's a God of mercy. Especially in this time, we know that he's a God of wrath. These are all things that are in his nature. When this prayer fails, it's the failure of Habakkuk's prayer that he is asking God for this mercy. He's asking God to make this injustice stop. But what is happening is God, again, true to his nature in this instance, he has to pass down judgment. The people in this time have strayed. They've gone away from what God's teaching is. They're practicing everything that they should not be practicing. So what has to happen is what's going to happen. We see kind of this duality of God, of him being a just God, but then him also being a merciful God. That it's no different even than what it is today. God is still a just God. Everybody who is against him, everybody who doesn't believe, everybody who is on the opposite side is going to feel that just judgment. That same perfect balance that he has is what we actually had to allow happen, or not allow happen, but what we had to accept is Jesus had to die for that just side of God. We are all sinners. There's no sacrifice sufficient for us, but because God is just and there is no waning from that, there had to be an intercession. That intercession was his son coming, being that perfect sacrifice for us. There wouldn't be anything less that would accomplish that. There's no other thing that could be given that would be anywhere close to sufficient to offer that. So God, still true to his being, still true to who he is just, but in his mercy, he provided an intercession for us. Now the next section, in wrath, remember mercy. God's coming wouldn't be stopped, and the results are still going to be as terrifying as they were. And Habakkuk and any other experiencing that justice would only fear and ask for mercy. And mercy is what God, he does desire to give. We see it time and time again. He's allowing for intercession for any, in this, throughout the Old Testament that we read. He doesn't want to have to do these things. But, I mean, he wants for all of us to love him and follow him, obey him. But when we don't comply with that, that's when when justice or punishment does have to be doled out. Rejoicing in trial and covenant. So Habakkuk's ability to rejoice in the face of judgment is come to come as both amazing and amazingly difficult to comprehend. I mean, we struggle to be able to celebrate him, to be able to feel joy when we're in times of pain and times of hurt, going through difficulties in life. I mean, I can't think of any of us who have suffered something that's going to be as difficult as what they're about to go through. Not in this country or in this time, but for the mere fact that he's able to still rejoice in where he is in his station with God, it's just something that is kind of tough for a lot to come to grips with, myself included. Nathan in his book, again, gives a great comparison of having a joyful attitude as not being the same thing as emotional happiness. I mean, emotions ebb and flow. There's a difference from time to time in how we might feel emotionally, but that joyful being, that status of joy is kind of like an attitude set, or a point where we decide that we're going to be in. It's like we can choose to have the attitude of being joyful, regardless of what kind of state of emotion we might be in at that time. And we see so much failure of things today because everybody is seeking happiness, right? That's the core thing that everybody's looking at in life is what makes me happy, what's my truth. You can't deny me what makes me happy. If you've ever had an opportunity to talk to any of those people at any depth, none of them are really happy. They think what they're going for is going to be something that is what's going to complete them, to allow them to be themselves, but it's hollow. But having a joyful attitude, having that attitude and based thought that you're going to be okay through no matter what you've got, that's the difference in between those two. It's a difference between perspective, attitude, and feelings. So the next part, rejoicing, or from lament to trust. So Habakkuk starts off complaining to God. He's fearful for what his answer is. He's opening up. But one of the big things that we see in these times of trial, we see it here. Yes, sir?
That's what you're saying. I mean, my belief is power politics is amazing. I know people that have negative thinking, and they don't have good lives. The people that I don't care what situation you're in, you can always bring something positive away from it. I was not let that happen again, like you spoke with tonight about depression, things like that. It takes that, it takes knowing that, no one comes to the Father unless like Jesus, and he said it did. Of course, he said that, my yoke is easy, yours and worries on me. And if people would just know that and understand that and look at things and really empty themselves out in prayer instead of just saying a prayer, you have to empty yourself and be positive and know that you might not get the result you want, but it is for your own good. So I just want to make that point that God thing is where you go negative, you're just you want down those times.
Yeah, absolutely. If you didn't hear, David was speaking about the importance and the power of positive thinking. Again, that's towards that attitude base. It's if you've ever had the fortunate opportunity to be around somebody who is just overtly negative, it seems that everything's always wrong in their life. Everybody's against them. There's no positive outcome for anything to come. And it's like we have an ability to will these things upon ourselves, or it's only because we're focusing on those things that you become blind to those good things. Um, it's really a crucial component as to who we are as Christians, right? Is to be in that positive mindset. When we're studying through James, we were talking about rejoicing in times of persecution. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive to what anything that we would think should be done, but it's really what allows you to make it through it. When it comes down to it, as even what Habakkuk was saying here, is we know that God's going to win. Regardless of whatever the outcome is that's going to happen in our lifetime, regardless of what's going to be in front of us at any given moment, God's going to win out. There's nothing here on this earth that is going to be sufficient to be able to beat him, to conquer him, and to really even disrupt his plans. So in the last section there, from hope rooted in history. So God's known by what he has done, right? Even here in Habakkuk's time, time before that, time after, as we see now, God's unchanging. We're really blessed in the fact that we've got the opportunity to read everything as the Word's been preserved for us, but his nature is constant. There's no unwavering. Having that known history with him, there's the only thing that ever becomes different is the way that we listen to his word, the way that we react to his word, the way that we follow his word. A lot of us. We're the only thing that has that changing component. For Habakkuk and God's chosen people, I mean, how often would they look back to the Exodus, to seeing how they were brought to the promised land? Everything that God said that he's going to do, he's done. There's not any wavering in that. So having that hope rooted in that history. So what's the last thing that we're waiting on right now? He said that he's going to come back. He's done everything up to this point that he says he's going to do. So we have no doubt that he's coming. And we see here that we would love for it to happen right now. We would love for it to have happened already. But it's God's will is going to be what wins out. It's going to happen in his time and exactly when he wants it to happen. We might see a lot of weird things. I mean, we're already seeing a lot of weird things in this world. A lot of things are going to change. A lot of things are going to be not what we want. But again, his will is going to win out.
Something I hadn't really taken note of before, but it seems like the transformation that happened to Habakkuk, like we kind of see him say, like, I'll wait and see what I'm going to answer concerning my complaint. And then God says, let all the earth keep silent before me. And then he says,
always changed for the better for us instantly, but, it's not what's promised to us. Almost the reverse gets promised to us, is that, we know that we're going to suffer for him, but that's okay, because he is going to win in the end. And then we win in the end, by way of that. So in continuing there, it says, for us, we have the fulfillment of God's complete plan and promise in Jesus, as he has come, he was crucified, conquered death, by rising from the grave, and he ascended and is seated on his throne. Our hope is rooted in one true God who does what he says, and he keeps every promise, and he doesn't waver. There is no way for evil to win out. We've got everything that we've been promised so far has come to fruition. There's not going to be a end of the world by man's hands. There's not going to be a conquering of his kingdom. There's going to be a really terrifying moment where we're going to hear the trumpet, we're going to see the clouds pull back, and there's going to be a lot of knees touching the ground. All knees are going to bow. Yes, sir.
But I just can't help that we were talking about this in classification. I'm thinking, I'm 74 years old. And I remember, being on a farm and uncle and planting their crops. And I don't think they even rotate crops anymore. I mean, which is, I think, but I'm saying that you had maybe a radio. I put a TV on something. But now, you talk about this, you just go to you have a question. But the problem is, a lot of times on the internet, that question is not being answered properly. I'm just saying that it's unfortunate for the youth of today. I look and I know that sometimes you go to growing pains, but I really don't think that the world is really ready for this technology that's being at this time. But it will not.
Yeah.
Just try to do the best I can, but it's interesting and sad that things that happen to young people through all this gratification that work ethics are there, a lot of stuff is there. And you can tell, see, children that grow up on farms in the outer part, they compare to the children who live in the city. And it's just, to me, I think you need to get out, roll your sleeves up, sweat a little bit.
Absolutely. But I mean, it changes the whole perspective of the way that life is, right? Because we can get things instantaneously, material things. We feel that every aspect of our life should reflect that same thing.
And older folks have a lot of knowledge. I remember I was younger, the older ones had a lot of knowledge. But I think that it seems like we listen pretty good, but I'm not so sure that I did listen like I should have. But it,
Well, I mean, the good news is there's no new thing under the sun, right?
you know,
It's like, even though we've got all this technology and everything else, I mean, people still go through the same things that they go through. Bad people are still the same. Good folks are still there, even though they might not have the same kind of platform, but, yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for kind of suffering through that with us. Do we have any other comments about any of this? Yes, ma'am.
I just feel like the, like, metaphor at the end there, that can make gears and turn on high places, because it's like this, like, picture, it says here, I was thinking of a mountain goat, like, it's like precariously perched in an extremely dangerous spot, but it's super steady and not in danger at all, because it's like built for that. And it's like the same thing that God's people are built for, like we're built
not a solution. Faith will be the cause of your troubles.
Yeah. Absolutely. We had spent a good time, what was it, the trimester before last, when we were studying through James. Even back when, at that time I was teaching the high school class, just trying to really hammer home that bit of information is, we're definitely not promised peace as being his children. We're promised the opposite of that. So much so that they're telling us to rejoice when we have the opportunity to suffer for Christ. But we're going to win out. I mean, you look at how we came out of times like these COVID times. The world was absolutely losing their mind because they might die from this, and that was the worst thing for them that could happen. Yes, it could be scary thinking about death, but for us, I mean, that's almost like that's the first step to that final victory. We have the hope in Christ where they don't. They're going to suffer. We're going to suffer. But at the end of the suffering, we win out.
Well, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
I was, just real quick, I was curious about my COVID retreat. She's about 21 months old. Well, actually, right. So I'm on the internet. One says 18 miles an hour, and then I found another that said 35. So there's my technology. I got a quiz card, maybe I'll get on a clock or something. You know what I mean? That's your technology for you.
Yeah,
So,
you're not gonna get the answer there.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things going on that people, I don't like people protesting, but at least protest with knowledge. That's my view, that's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Don't protest, pass the knowledge, protest with knowledge.
Well, the fools are often the loudest ones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I need to, that's how bad I need to be quiet.
Well, thank you guys. Larry, do you mind ringing the bell? Kyle's not here this morning. So thank you guys so much. And again, this morning we're going to have Brother Ward will be preaching our sermon for us this morning.